Hello everyone, and welcome to Scary Tales. Tonight, we are here to help you relax or maybe even drift off to sleep with some truly terrifying, real-life horror stories. So, find a cozy spot, settle in, and prepare yourself for chilling tales that will send shivers down your spine. Now, let's begin the stories. Story number 1. In the middle of Australia, in a quiet little town called Barham, right by the winding Murray River, I worked the night shift at a 24-hour petrol station. It was one of those lonely places on the edge of town, where the silence of the night could be both peaceful and unsettling. The locals often shared strange stories about eerie happenings near the river and around the station, and it didn't take long for me to realize that these weren't just old tales. On my very first shift, one of my co-workers casually warned me not to be startled by the shadows on the security cameras. At first I thought he was joking, just another trick to spook the new guy, but the serious look in his eyes told me otherwise. He explained that these weren't normal shadows or glitches in the system. They moved differently, smoothly, deliberately, appearing and disappearing as if they had a mind of their own. My boss, an older man who had worked there for years, spoke of them even more casually, as if they were just part of the job. Ignore them, he said, or they might start paying attention to you. The way he said it, with no hint of amusement, sent a chill down my spine. That first night, as the clock ticked past midnight, the station seemed to change. The buzzing fluorescent lights flickered unpredictably. The radio would burst into static without warning, and the fridge in the back would hum a little too loudly before going silent. But the security footage was the worst of it. At around 2 a.m., I saw it, a figure pacing just beyond the reach of the station's lights. It wasn't clear. It was more like a shadow, blending into the darkness but moving with purpose. Whenever a car passed by, its headlights should have illuminated whatever was standing there. But each time, the figure simply vanished. My co-worker, Tony, who was on shift with me, tried to act like it was nothing, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He had seen it too. I tried to brush it off as exhaustion, a trick of the eyes from working late. But deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't normal. That eerie feeling stuck with me long after my shift ended, and I wasn't the only one. Months later, I found myself at a bonfire on a friend's property. It was a typical gathering. Warm fire, cold drinks, and the hum of easy conversation. But then I ran into Tony. He looked different, like someone who hadn't quite shaken off something heavy. As we sat by the fire, he started talking about that night at the petrol station. At first, it was just small details, how the station always felt too quiet, how he hated looking at the security monitors. But then his voice dropped, and he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that after we left that job, the presence, the shadow, didn't leave him alone. He would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like something was watching him. And then, one night, he heard it speak. It whispered his name. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but the voice wasn't just any voice. It sounded like his grandmother's. She'd been gone for years, but this voice wasn't warm or familiar. It was cold, distant, and wrong. It called him over and over again, each time with a tone that sent shivers down his spine. He never answered, never acknowledged it, and eventually, it stopped. Hearing Tony's story only confirmed what I had already feared. That petrol station in Barham was more than just a lonely outpost in the night. It was a place where something lingered, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. The shadows on the security cameras, the vanishing figure, the voice that called out from the darkness. It all pointed to something beyond explanation, something that defied reason. Even though I left that job after just a few days, the memory of that place still lingers in my mind. It's a reminder that some places hold secrets, and sometimes it's best not to look too closely. Because when you start paying attention to the unknown, you might find that it starts paying attention to you. Story number 2. In the wild and remote northwest highlands of Scotland, where winters are long and unforgiving, there's a story my brother and I still talk about to this day. It happened back in 2013, during a time when we were both working in the salmon industry, surrounded by the vast, untamed beauty of the land. Our village was small, with only about 50 houses scattered along the rugged coastline. Life there was quiet, caught between the eerie calm of dark winter nights and the howling rage of stormy winds. While I found comfort in my mother's warm stone house, my brother chose to live differently. He rented an old, massive house about half a mile up the road, a 6-bedroom structure tucked among the trees. It had a strange energy to it, an unsettling presence woven into its dusty furniture, creaking floors, and forgotten corners. Something about the place just felt different. One winter night, the air was unnaturally still. My brother was alone, watching TV in his living room, feeling somewhat at ease in the silence. But then, out of nowhere, something happened that shattered that peace completely. The door handle of his living room door, the one that led directly outside but hadn't been used in a long time, began to shake violently. Not the door itself, just the handle, rattling and twisting, as if someone on the other side was desperately trying to force their way in. It continued for several long seconds, a rhythmic, deliberate motion. The strangest part, his living room had large windows facing that very door, offering a clear view of the outside. He quickly turned his head, expecting to see someone there. But there was no one, no shadow, no movement, just the handle rattling on its own. He sat frozen, every hair on his body standing on end, listening to the sound of metal scraping against wood. He wasn't the type to believe in ghosts, but this was something different. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something he couldn't explain, something real enough to make his stomach twist in fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the rattling stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. That night, sleep did not come easily for him. The next day, my brother was visibly shaken. He tried to go about his routine as usual, but I could tell something was wrong. And then, later that evening, I had my own strange experience inside that very house. I was alone in the gym, a downstairs room that had been converted into a workout space. The house was dead silent except for the sound of my own movements. Then, from above, I heard it. Slow, heavy footsteps dragging across the wooden floor. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The sound wasn't normal. It was deliberate, slow, as if something was moving just above me, making sure I could hear it. I told myself it was just the house settling, But the longer I stood there, the less I believed that. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. I didn't dare move. Every instinct told me to leave, to get out of that house. I grabbed my things and left without looking back. What made these experiences even more unsettling was the ruin that sat just beyond the trees, not far from my brother's house. It was an ancient, crumbling structure from the 18th or 19th century, barely standing against the test of time. By day it was just an old abandoned building, but at night it became something else entirely. It loomed in the darkness, untouched by the faint glow of streetlights, a black silhouette against the night sky. Whenever I walked past with my mother's dog, the animal would suddenly stop, ears pricked, fur bristling. It would growl low and deep, staring toward the ruin, refusing to move. Unlike the other old buildings nearby, which felt harmless, this place had an energy to it, something sorrowful, something angry. It felt as though it held onto memories, onto something long forgotten but not quite gone. I never liked walking near it at night. Something about it felt wrong. Between the shaking door handle, the heavy footsteps in the empty house, and the ominous presence of the ruin, these experiences became more than just isolated events. They became part of a bigger mystery, one that neither my brother nor I could explain. They made us question the world around us, the thin veil between the known and the unknown. Even now, years later, we still talk about that house, about the things that happened there, about the feeling that something or someone was still there, watching. There are places in this world that hold on to their past, places where history lingers in the air like a whisper. Some stories don't fade away. They stay, waiting for the next person to notice them. And in the quiet, desolate beauty of the Scottish Highlands, some places are never truly empty. Story number 3. After finishing high school last year, I was eager for a fresh start. I wanted to experience independence, so I decided to move to a new city for college. After hours of searching, I found the perfect place. A quiet neighborhood about 3 hours away from my hometown. My new apartment was cozy, private, and safe. The streets were peaceful, the neighbors were friendly, and there were plenty of cafes, parks, and shops nearby. It felt like the perfect place to begin this new chapter of my life. For 4 months, everything was perfect. I adjusted well, built a daily routine, and even became close friends with a fellow college student who lived just 5 minutes away. We often visited each other, spending hours studying, laughing, and enjoying our time together. Life felt stable and secure. One cold winter night, my friend invited me over to hang out and play video games. The night was filled with easy laughter, music, and friendly competition. We played for hours, completely losing track of time. By the time I decided to leave, it was already past 1 a.m. The streets outside were empty, wrapped in an eerie silence that only winter nights seemed to hold. As I walked home, the cold air bit at my skin, but the quiet was oddly peaceful. When I arrived at my apartment, I decided to step onto my balcony for a moment before heading to bed. It was a habit I had picked up, a way to take in the quiet of the night. From up there, I could see the building's entrance and the dimly lit street below. A few cars rolled by slowly, their headlights briefly illuminating the otherwise deserted road. I stood there for a while, breathing in the cold air, enjoying the stillness. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of my doorbell shattered the silence. I froze. Who would be at my door at this hour? My heart started pounding as I turned to face the apartment door. My first thought was my friend, but he always texted before coming over. The doorbell rang again, followed by a soft but deliberate knock. A chill ran down my spine. Something didn't feel right. I hesitated for a few moments before slowly creeping toward the door, my footsteps barely making a sound on the floor. Holding my breath, I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to catch any noise from the other side. Silence. But something told me I wasn't alone. Summoning my courage, I lifted the peephole cover and peered outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man stood there, hood pulled over his head, face barely visible except for his piercing eyes. His posture was stiff, unnatural, like he was waiting for something. Then, in a low, deliberate voice, he spoke. "I know you're at the door." The words sent a jolt of terror through my body. His voice was eerily calm, almost rehearsed, as if he had said it before. My breath hitched, and my hands clenched into fists. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring through the peephole, unable to look away. Then, as if he could sense my fear, he let out a quiet, chilling laugh. Slowly, he reached up and wiped the door handle with his sleeve before turning and walking away. My heart was hammering in my chest. I backed away from the door, forcing my shaky hands to grab my phone. Without hesitation, I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what had just happened. The officers arrived quickly and confirmed what I feared. This wasn't the first report of a hooded figure lurking around the area. They suspected he was the same man responsible for a recent home invasion. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, I packed a bag and stayed at my friend's place for a week. Even though the man hadn't broken in, his presence haunted me. Every creak in the apartment, every shadow in the hallway, every faint noise outside made my stomach twist with fear. I kept replaying that moment in my head, his eyes through the peephole, his voice that sinister laugh. This experience changed the way I saw my surroundings. What had once been a peaceful, safe apartment now felt vulnerable, like the walls weren't enough to keep danger out. Even after I moved back, I never felt truly comfortable there again. Story number 4. It all started on a freezing March morning in northern England. The air was crisp, the streets were silent, and a thick layer of snow covered everything in sight. It was the kind of morning that made you want to stay in bed, wrapped in a warm blanket. But I had errands to run. I needed groceries, and with no work obligations that day, I decided to make a quick trip to the nearby store. It was supposed to be a simple task, just a routine outing to grab a few essentials. But that decision would soon lead me into one of the most terrifying moments of my life. Stepping outside, I was met with an almost eerie silence. The world around me was frozen, both in temperature and in movement. My car, parked outside overnight, was buried under a thick layer of ice. I didn't have the patience to clear it completely, so I only scraped off just enough to see through the windshield. It was a lazy decision, but the store was just a few minutes away. What could possibly go wrong? With that thought, I locked my car and made my way to the grocery store, a small but busy shop that sat at the intersection of 4 roads. The trip to the store was quick. I grabbed my groceries, paid at the register, and was about to leave when something unusual happened. The shop assistant, who normally helped me carry my bags to the car, was in a hurry to close up, so he didn't accompany me this time. That was the first sign that something felt off. Still, I didn't think much of it. I wanted to get home quickly, so instead of fumbling for my keys in the cold, I unlocked my car remotely from inside the store. As soon as I did, the headlights flickered on, illuminating the dark parking lot. At first, I welcomed the extra light, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. 2 men running toward the shop from across the street. I told myself they were just pedestrians, maybe late-night shoppers, and continued walking to my car. As I reached the driver's door, I hurriedly placed my grocery bags inside. That's when I noticed movement, a shadow passing by, quick and deliberate. Before I could react, a loud knock came from the passenger side window. My body tensed. I turned my head, and there, standing just inches away, was a man. His face was twisted into an unsettling grin. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. He laughed, a low, hollow sound that echoed through the empty lot. Then he gripped the door handle and yanked at it repeatedly. My heart pounded in my chest. Instinct took over. I reached for the gear shift, ready to drive away, but the parking sensors beeped loudly. A second man was standing directly behind my car, blocking my escape. Panic surged through me. My phone was at home. There was no one around to help. I was trapped. The man by the passenger door grew impatient. His playful grin twisted into frustration as he slammed his fists against the window. Then suddenly, a loud bang. My side mirror had been kicked off. That was it. I knew I had only one chance to escape. I took a deep breath, gripped the steering wheel, and slammed the car into reverse. The man behind the car barely dodged in time, stumbling backward as I turned the wheel sharply. But now, the other one had moved directly in front of me. My options were limited. I either stopped and risked being pulled from my car, or I kept going. I chose to keep going. Pressing my foot down on the gas, I sped forward. At the last second, the man in front of me jumped out of the way, tires screeching, heart pounding. I raced out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. But the nightmare wasn't over. As I neared my home, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if they followed me? My car was easily recognizable, and I couldn't risk leading them to my doorstep. Instead of parking directly in front of my house, I stopped a few streets away. Only then did I step out to check the damage. My side mirror was gone, but that wasn't the worst of it. When I walked around to the front, my stomach dropped. My front tire had been slashed. It wasn't a random attack. They had planned this. That night changed everything for me. I realized how easily a simple mistake, like unlocking my car too soon or not checking my surroundings, could turn into a life-threatening situation. From that day forward, I changed my habits. Now, I never unlock my car until I'm standing right next to it. I reprogrammed the settings so that only the driver's door unlocks. And most importantly, I never ever visit that shop after dark. Thanks for listening. Goodbye. Have a restful sleep.